And something I'm thinking about is how offering somebody a different energy, that is so often what's needed. But I can totally think of moments when someone was trying to give me a loving energy, but I wouldn't have it because I was like, no, trust me, I can't be calm. I can't chill out. I can't let go of this. It's not going to be okay. I really need to figure out the details of this or that situation. And I refuse to receive a responsive, loving energy because there's some kind of block in me where I don't feel like things are going to be okay unless I really do solve this practical problem. But that's not true. What I really do need is like a deep sense of calm and ease. And so I hear that in this question of like how relevant is what a Buddhist monk offers to every situation. It is the most relevant thing. But we're not in a situation to hear that or recognize that all the time because we're so, obsessed with our own day-to-day projects and convinced that if they don't work out the way that we want them to, that life is over. So to have somebody like in the flesh witnessing life can go on, you are okay, it forces a question that we sometimes don't even want to, we don't feel brave enough to go there. My name is Diana Brown, and I am very happy to be here today with my friend and co-host Mallory Everton. And today we are talking to a good friend of mine, Jonathan Makransky. We used to work together at Georgetown University in their multi-faith campus ministry there. And Jonathan is a devout and very inspiring to me Buddhist. And he has brought his friend, Venerable Tien Nguyen, who is a Buddhist monk. And we're going to be talking today about true love. So thank you both so much for coming. This is going to be fun.
Thanks for having us.
It's an honor to be here.
Thank you.
Ditto.
Yes. Okay. Well, I guess just to get started, I thought it would be fun getting things off the ground for us all to talk about a time when we first remember experiencing love, and not just as like a sort of pleasant backdrop for our lives, right? Like, oh, my family, so sweet, but just like love is an actual force. Because a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is what we really mean by that word and like the extent to which it can be cultivated and like actually sort of like have effects in the world. And Jonathan and Venerable, if you would like to go first, and also just tell us a little bit more about who you are, where you're located, what you're doing with your lives, etc. Yeah, Jonathan, do you want to go first?
Sure. Happy to kick us off. Thanks so much for having us on. I think this is going to be a really fun conversation. So my name's Jonathan Makransky. I was born and raised and still practice in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, just for a little background on me. So still very much a part of my Sangha, which is the Buddhist community, and actually just recently returned from a great trip to Nepal where I was able to reconnect with a lot of folks in my community. So I kind of bring that background to bear here. And these days I'm working over at Harvard Divinity School, coordinating the multi-religious ministry initiatives here. So a variety of different initiatives, but part of that is the Buddhist Ministry Initiative, which provides a lot of supports for our Buddhist students here who are studying in chaplaincy, other kinds of spiritual leadership, Buddhist studies, to have the resources they need. So it's a lot of fun. Never a boring job for sure. So thinking about the memory piece, memory of love as an actual force, it's kind of hard to pick just one because I feel like there are several I could bring to mind. But I think one that came to mind immediately was that of my grandmother, who, when I was a little kid, she had really terrible arthritis. So she was stuck in an armchair for most of her life when I knew her, for like the last 20 years of her life. She couldn't really move. But I remember we would always visit her as a little kid. We would go out to visit her in Indianapolis with my mom and my brother and my dad. And I still vividly remember whenever we would walk into her living room where her armchair was, even though she couldn't get up and hug us or greet us really, aside from just, shouting, "Hey, so good to see you," from the chair. There is this really strong kind of enveloping quality to her love for us. And I remember just as a very nervous, anxious kid, as soon as we walked into her living room, all of that would kind of melt away. And she just had this radiating quality of love that like hit you right when you went into her living room. So that's actually
Mm.
some of my first memories when I was 3 or 4 years old. This quality of love that really kind of hits you and just like melts all the way through you, sort of beyond your own preconception
Yeah.
of who you are. Um, yeah. So just simple memory like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was beautiful. So hi, Tien Nguyen. I am a Buddhist monk from Vietnam. I came here in 2016 for my master degree. I thought after finishing my master degree I would go back, but now I'm kind of staying here and go back and forth. So right now I'm staying Boston and Brockton, which is 20 miles apart because I have helped establish a new Buddhist organization here in Brockton. So right now I'm in two places, one temple in Boston and another temple here in Brockton.
Mm.
So an earliest memory that I remember actually is about love and care. So I remember my mom. Whenever that question hit me, I evoke my mom who passed away last year. This is her picture.
Oh,
Mm.
thank you for
Yeah,
showing us her picture. What a lovely
yeah. Thank
smile.
you. So I remember I was like 4 or 5, and I was sick at the time, and my mom kind of she was stay at home mom, and in rural Vietnam, she has to do a lot of things in the house. So at the time that morning she was washing our clothes on the in the big bucket, and I was sick. I was laying down on a hammock, and she was washing it and also looking after me. And every once in a while she would come to me and then place her really cold hand, because she was washing clothes in the water, and she placed her hand on my forehead, and that kind of woke me up. But also when I woke up and I saw her face, you know at that moment, even though I was ill, but her love and care showed in the action of just placing her hand over my head. I was overwhelmed by that love and care that my mom had for me. So that was the
Mm.
earliest memory that I had, and that kind of care influenced my life until now. Even though we don't say much in our culture, we don't say I love you, or we say express our love in words, but we show that in action, and just small action from the heart of a loving parent that speaks louder than, I think, any language.
My memory that I thought of first was also my mother, and it also involved her touching my face when I was a kid. I used to really struggle sleeping, and I would get these nightmares, and I'd get really like worried and scared at night. And I have many memories, but a few really solid ones from the ages probably 4 and up, of my mom either coming into my room or me being in her room, and she would draw my face. Like she would trace around my mouth and up the bridge of my nose and around my eyes until I fell asleep. And I just always had this sense that she didn't have anywhere else to be, and that
Mm.
she loved being there with me, and that I was completely safe. And it was literally a sleeping pill as a kid to have my face drawn like that. And it's so funny. I ended up becoming an actor, and I have my makeup done quite a bit, or at least I did for a lot of years when I had a really steady job. And whenever those like gentle women would touch my face, and men sometimes, but often women, um, I felt the same thing. There's just a tenderness to having your face touched in that way by someone who doesn't have anywhere else to be. And that's my first
Yeah.
memory.
It's so lovely. Oh my gosh, I'm like already wanting to cry.
Yeah,
I
it was
love
great.
hearing all of these. I can share mine since we all shared about women. I'll share one about my dad. My dad he's Italian. He's a little bit cantankerous sometimes. He's also very restless. He's like 74 now and still like bikes like 25 miles a day or something like that. Like just
Wow.
has a lot of energy. And so he's not the type to just like sit on a couch with you and shoot the breeze. And I think because he's like such a singular personality, it makes it more visible the way that he sees people and is trying so hard to communicate, love. And I remember when I was like 7 or 8 being sick with the chicken pox. And my mom was taking very good care of me. We had oatmeal baths and make sure I was fat or whatever. But my dad, I think, was the one who was like, poor Diana, she's probably really bored. And so I remember he like sat with me and he just did a puzzle and we didn't say anything. We just sat and did that puzzle for hours. And then it became a tradition where like we actually really liked it. And I just have all of these memories of doing puzzles with my dad. And we didn't have any conversation. This wasn't like father-daughter chit chat. Later on, he used to like sometimes pick me up from violin lessons before school and take me to breakfast and then drop me off at school. And I remember also just like being at Denny's, sitting over this plate of French toast, saying nothing, but just thinking like, my dad is really trying to spend time with me. And I guess part of the context too is I have 10 siblings. So having one-on-one time with a parent was very rare. There was lots of siblings around, there was lots of stuff to do, there was always people around, but he really wanted to tell me with those one-on-one moments, like, you matter to me, I enjoy your existence. And even if I don't really know what to say, because I don't know, life's weird, it's a Tuesday morning, just like, I'm gonna spend really focused time with you. And anyway, I just really feel that for my dad.
There's always a lot of love on Tuesday mornings at Denny's.
That's been my
It's true.
experience. Oh, Diana, that was lovely. What a good way to start a conversation. I feel like my heart is just so warm and happy.
Yeah. I feel that too. Why do we ever start conversations in any other
Yeah.
way? All of a sudden.
Always just talk about our first memory of the purest form of love.
Yeah. So I guess just moving forward. So eventually we want to just learn lots of Buddhist wisdom on this topic from Venerable and from Jonathan. But before that, I thought it might be good to just lay some groundwork about Buddhism, and in particular, like your paths towards it. And obviously, if you're raised in a Buddhist family, in a Buddhist culture, it's always going to be part of your background. But both of you have really chosen Buddhism in a very intentional and deliberate, devout way, and also in different ways. Venerable, you are a monk, and Jonathan, you're a lay Buddhist, but I know you're a very serious and devout one. And so I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about, for lack of a better term, I'm sorry, but your Buddhist journeys. I guess Venerable, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. Okay. So I was born in a also devout traditional Buddhist family, and I think the Buddhist values were embedded in my upbringing. So when I growing up, love and care were present all the time, because we know that the practice of in Buddhism, there are two main important things: wisdom and compassion. So wisdom is what is from, we can say, it's from the brain, the mind, but the compassion is from the heart. So growing up with those values invite me to explore more. So that's why I enter the monastic life, and to be able to be able to free myself, and also to spread that compassion to many people as possible. And I was a kind of a rebel in my monastic training, so I kind of stepped out of that space to explore more. That's why I came to the US to study more. And I thought, as a Buddhist monastic, I am qualified to teach here in the US after finishing my education, because at the time, so I'm proud to acknowledge my ignorance when I first got here, because I thought that only monastic members can teach Buddhism, can teach compassion, because you're free, right? You don't have any attachment to your own small family, so you can freely teach people without any attachment. But then gradually I realized that I'm awakened that in the US, many people prefer lay teachers than to monastic teachers, because you have that experience. You have the family life, the struggle, the conflicts, all whatever that entails, and then you are more relevant to your audience. So now I'm happy that Buddhist teachers combines of both monastic and lay practitioners, and that is a great thing. So that to my hope that we can spread love, compassion to as many people as possible. And right now I'm still learning how to be more relevant, even though I don't have that kind of experience, family tie, or I know Jonathan will have more to say about that, but I'm happy that that's one of the good things that I take away from my time here. That the awakened moments, I step out of my comfort zone, step out of my ignorant mind to know that there are more possibilities of teaching than I thought before. So yeah.
Before we hear from Jonathan, would you mind talking a little bit about when and how you became a monk, and if that was something that you always knew or that you chose, or was a difficult choice? I'd be so curious to hear. Diana said this before the call, but in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we don't have an ascetic tradition, and so we're fascinated by it, especially because it's sort of, we talked about this a few weeks ago with a Catholic priest, but it can feel like the ascetic tradition is almost like thrust upon you when you're a single person in a nuclear family focused church. And so I'm very interested in your specific tradition and what I might be able to learn from it personally.
We kind of wake up, we're like, I guess I'm kind of living like a monk, But we didn't choose it. Anyway, sorry.
So I think so growing up, I met a lot of monks who were my father's friends. My father was not a monk, but he had many monks friends coming to our house. And when I saw them, I was like 7 or 8. First time I can remember met the first monk. When I saw them, I loved their appearance. They wear yellow robe, shaved head, and there's some radiance. So, and meeting those monks, and also in our family, my father he had a habit to write little verses of Buddhist sutra, Buddhist scriptures, and he hang around the house to. It's a kind of decoration, but also a reminder for all of us to live by those teachings. And the first time I asked them, Dad, I wanted to be a monk, when I was like 8, or I don't know, 7 or 8. And he said, no, you're too small, you don't know anything, so just wait. And then when I was 10, I asked them again, and he continued saying that you are too small, don't say such a thing, you don't know anything about that. So because I'm the youngest in the family, I don't know, so he didn't really trust me that time. But when I was 15, I asked one more time, and he said yes. He reluctantly said yes. My mom kind of opposed the idea because she didn't want me to leave her, So my mom, but she didn't have any saying in the matter. My dad let me go, and I was 15 when I first became a novice monk. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm
That's so-
30, 34, 35 now. So if that matters.
So yeah,
Wow.
just like from very young, just feeling this sort of call and then the determination. That's really beautiful. I know we'll get to Jonathan's journey soon, but one thing too that I wanted to know about what you said, I thought it was interesting that there's this concern that as a monk, and you're not relevant because you haven't had the experiences with family life and dating and being up close in too tight proximity with other human beings. But it strikes me that there's like, I mean, everything's relevant. I can imagine that the kind of very focused attention and love that you're able to get and just like think about and offer the world in like a kind of universal and less specific, but more like open-ended way. That, I mean, I feel like when I'm in the presence of a person who's really committed to a path of holiness, I feel something. And it's interesting because, like, I mean, it's so relevant. There's nothing more relevant than being like, whoa, you can feel different in your body. You can like feel love instead of panic and stress. Like, that's extremely relevant, but it's not a kind that I know how to put into words all the time. And it's not the same as like a dating advice column that's like, okay, here's how you should respond when she says this. But like, it's such a gift to be able to like embody just a different way of being. Yeah.
I had the same thought, Diana. I was like, what could be more relevant than studying love every day for 20 years? Is there anything but love and fear? And love and its opposites. And the downside to like an advice columnist or whatever is that often that advice applies to very specific situations, but your expertise, Venerable, applies to every situation that anyone could possibly have. And don't we all feel unrelatable in one way or another? I feel like as a woman who has not been married and not had children sometimes that I am unrelatable or am inaccessible or that I couldn't possibly be useful to a married person. And I've been proven wrong many, many times that the lessons that I'm learning seem to apply to across divides all the time. But I can relate to the feeling for sure.
And I'll also just chime in here quickly as on the layperson side that we certainly look to our monastic sangha and our community as like as you were saying, Diana and Mallory, as like the upholders of this sort of those who delve really deeply into this knowledge of love and wisdom on behalf of all of us. And so I think you're certainly always relevant, Venerable, on that front. I think this strong ascetic tradition is really indispensable in some ways to the Buddhist community and its conceptions of love in a more boundless sense. Yeah. Embodied way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm excited to dig more into this. Jonathan, do you want to tell us more about your own path with Buddhism?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm glad Venerable Tien went first, because it's really great to hear from someone who's taken the monastic path on this front. So of course I'm in more of a lay path right now. I also grew up in a Buddhist family. So my mom and dad both converted to Tibetan Buddhism back in the 70s and 80s when they were living in India in the Tibetan community in exile there, while my dad was working on some research for his PhD. And my mom was trained as a nurse, so she actually lived in like the communities providing healthcare as well while my dad was studying there. And then my dad actually ended up getting ordained as a lama in the Tibetan tradition, which is like literally translates to teacher. So it's equivalent to a priest or other religious leader. But he, of course, is a lay person because he's still married to my mom. So I guess we're a family of lay practitioners on that front. And yeah, so I kind of grew up with it in a sense, informing everything in the background. Like I remember pretentiously, quote unquote, pretending to meditate on the playground when I was in elementary school, going up to the top of the slide and just like supposedly meditating up there, which is a very ridiculous thing to do as a young child in respect.
I would have hated you as a kid.
Yeah,
That
well,
cool
you would have
meditator guy making me
you
look
would have
So
hated
bad.
calm,
Yeah.
always chill. Mhm.
Exactly.
That's so
That's so
cute.
Yeah. So that, yeah, and then I actually remember briefly becoming worried when I was a kid because my parents got me like a children's Bible just for general religious literacy, and it's important to read texts from other religions. And I remember briefly becoming worried that we were going to hell because we weren't Christian after reading the
Oh,
Bible, and then I got over that pretty quickly. But it was an interesting way to grow up for sure. Um, as a kid in the U.S., growing up in a Buddhist family was not very usual, at least in Massachusetts. I sort of developed my own relationship with it when I was in college, and I spent a few summers living at my teacher's sort of branch of his center in the U.S. in California, and learning really deeply from the monks and the lamas, the lay sangha there, and continuing to connect with it as an adult. And yeah, it's just been a really amazing sort of way to live, I suppose, that I've always just felt really connected to. And again, really grateful to members of our monastic sangha and our teachers too, because I think I agree exactly with what you were saying, Diana. I think when they walk into a room, they change the energy of the room, and you can really feel it. And they act as sort of paragons for all of us to lean into. So
Mhm.
I try to bring that sort of quality as much as possible through my own spiritual practice into my relationships, even as a
Mhm.
married person. So with
Yeah.
varying degrees of success, I'm sure. But yeah.
Well, I know when we were working together, Jonathan was beloved by all in our frankly highly dramatic office. I think to be
It was dramatic.
it was a very a dramatic place, and I certainly acquired a few haters there, but I don't think a single person would have ever said anything bad about Jonathan ever, which
That.
just to say there really was though a calm and a very graceful way that I've always thought that you have of dealing with people. All right. Well, I think this is a good transition point to as we start to dissect what love is, and thinking about love as a sort of force and a power and an energy that you can cultivate.
So we, in preparation for this discussion, we read Thich Nhat Hanh's book True Love, and even in the beginning of our conversation, we talked about maternal love quite a bit, and paternal love as well, but sort of this unrelenting, unconditional love that we can offer each other. But in a dating context, when people are trying to partner up, when people are trying, when it that kind of love feels scary. It feels almost irresponsible. It feels like sometimes it feels misleading, like maybe unkind almost to give someone that kind of love because you might quote unquote give them the wrong idea. Suddenly there's all these games and all this self-protecting, and it I because I have been dating for a very long time, and but I've also become more and more interested in what we're describing, the Buddhist approach to love and life and the non-dualistic approach is very attractive to me, and I want to cultivate this kind of love, and I have been making an effort to try and bring it into my dating life as well, but I will admit it's been messy and hard. And the question that comes up for me sometimes is romantic love inherently selfish? Is there a way to actually just give your generous love and kindness and compassion to the world, and also somehow end up possessing a partner? You know does this make any sense? I'm just feeling like in a swirl personally about these ideas, and how it almost feels like romantic love is at odds with this more maternal, generous love. And I don't know how to bridge those gaps sometimes, and I'm
Yeah.
curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like the question of how to bring that into a dating space is really hard. And I think that I feel like I relate to that feeling of nihilism, of just like, why try? Like dating is horrible. It's just like you're in this constant like churn of people coming in and out. And I just think we're wounding each other so deeply. And often like without even seeing it or what we're doing, it's like all happening too fast. I just think, yeah, dating apps have like sped up the way in which we like wound each other and like misperceive each other. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I wonder if that's partly where some of this nihilism in me comes from too, is just like not really knowing how to engage in this space in a way that feels loving in the least.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think on the ground, it's easy to talk about these high ideals of boundless loving kindness and compassion, right? But then on the ground, in the dating world, it's a lot harder to see how it actually plays out. I'm married now, but I used to be on the dating scene, of course, prior to all this. And if my wife's listening to this, I will just say that, yes, I do think it is possible to have romantic love unselfishly along with this other love.
Okay.
So don't worry. She sometimes worries that I'm going to run off and become a monk, which won't happen. Don't worry.
I'll convince you.
What's that?
I'll convince you.
Get you. Venerable's gonna
Sneaky.
get you, Jonathan.
Sneaky. But yeah, I'll just say, I don't think there's easy answers to a lot of what you're raising. And I think it is kind of just endemic to the world that we're in now, in terms of societal obstacles to genuine connection, as we've said. I think there can be a way, though, at least in my experience, I think particularly around self-love and self-compassion first. We often jump straight to extending love and compassion to others, but an integral part of the tradition as well is ensuring that we are held in these same qualities of love and compassion at the same time. And so I always found that if I'm being really mindful of the way that I'm held in love and compassion at all times and showing up in that way, that allows me to be mindful of the way that I'm interacting with other people in a deeper way than I would be otherwise. And so, yeah, it's still going to be like messy wherever there's dating, attraction, and sex, of course, and all of that. It's inherently messy. But I think that does sort of mindset does go a long way towards starting to mitigate some of the harm. In my tradition, in Tibetan Buddhism, in Vajrayana Buddhism, that there's this idea that any sort of emotion or experience that we have can be taken onto the path and serve as spiritual fuel for us that can be metabolized. So even things like desire, anger, hurt can all be sort of turned on their head to release some of the energy of enlightened mind that's underlying them. The idea is basically that all of these emotions arise out of the nature of our experience, the nature of our mind that's inherently pure and enlightened already. And so if we can recognize that underlying state, even if we like have a really sad and angry moment with someone we're dating, or someone treats us really badly, or we get caught up in these winds of desire, we can turn that on its head in the moment and use that sort of energy and fuel for our own growth at the same time, which is, again, easier said than done.
Yeah.
But I'll just give a quick shout out to Lama Rod Owens, who delves into this a lot. If anyone's interested, he's written a lot on desire and anger as fuel for enlightenment, partly out of relationships as well.
Well,
I'm writing that down. Sorry.
I know. We'll have to think to that. I think one thing too, as you're talking, that I'm realizing would help a lot with this, if you can hold your relationship status lightly, it like rejection, which we've all experienced, is so much easier too, right? Like, because I think part of it is this feeling of like, oh no, my life will be ruined, and feeling like your future depends on another person choosing you. I think sometimes that's something that is so hard to bear, is this fear that you can't really belong to the world in a real or legitimate way unless a person chooses you and you enter into this certain type of relationship. And again, in a church like ours that really wants to prize marriage and the type of growth there, when you make an idol of marriage, or make it so like you really feel like you're belonging to the world, or to like your capacity to love depends on these things that are so out of your control, that is such a heavy thing to bring to the world. And it's not to victim blame, but I think like when we're in a position of like feeling rejected, that's like a question that's probably worth really sitting with, is like, where am I bringing to this pain an expectation that maybe isn't appropriate to it, or just like an expectation or a fear or a sense that, yeah, you can't be full and whole without this person choosing you. Anyway, I think holding your relationship lightly, your relationship status lightly, is something that's important, because if everything depends on somebody choosing you, it's just like the capacity for love or a loving response to that feels like pretty low.
I think that could be in part because I've been thinking as we've been talking that the reason sometimes romantic love feels selfish to me is because it feels like it's about getting something from another person. And romantic love is not the only situation where this happens. You know, obviously you can want something from all kinds of things from people. I want this job opportunity from this person. I want this person's friendship because it would mean something to me. And I feel like if we are in fear and we feel like we're lacking and we need to get a relationship in order to feel like we're okay, then we are seeking something from another person instead of just offering our love. It makes it so much easier to offer love. In fact, maybe this is the only way that real love can be offered. If you are practicing what Jonathan was talking about, which is caring for and being compassionate toward your experience in a way where you would not require the validation of another person to feel whole and acceptable and enough. But boy, is it tricky. Venerable, I'm dying to hear your thoughts. What do you think?
When you talk about romantic love, I remember my parents, who I don't think they love each other when they first met, because in Vietnam, you know, back in the day, they were introduced by their families, so that when they met, okay, you get married this one, and then they built a family out of that. You know, you may call arrangement, but still they love each other, and they love their children. And in Buddhism, there's a teaching about compassion, that you love the world, you love people like you love your only child, you know. So having a child and love him or love her selfishly can also be something that we cultivate to love other people like we love our only child. And that it remember is from our selfish love for our immediate family, and that can be expanded, right? And talking about dating, since I don't have any experience, I just want to say that we are the product of our culture, our tradition, our society. We depends on our context, right? That is applicable to any person you date too. I think you don't know them, they don't know you at first. And if I am a broken person who missed something in my life, and I try to find that in someone I date, then I would be more broken, I think. Because what if that person also broken, and then trying to find something in you with their also agendas? How can you find something from external world that could fulfill you if that not from within? So maybe that is my Buddhist talking, but I think if the idea of offering your love, and knowing that that person may not feel the same thing as feel, would eventually, if that doesn't work out, you wouldn't feel so wounded. I don't know why people would base their value on the fact that if I'm not chosen by that person, I don't have any value. My life is pointless. Why do we have that kind of idea. We are as beautiful as we are. Whether that in this culture, in this the mainstream American culture, that we have the idea that if we are not chosen by someone, then we are worthless. So we have to examine that, right? So yeah, I don't know if two people who are unbroken, like a person, normal person, come to each other to share something, share a certain emotion which is called love, then you share something, you contribute something without hidden agenda, then that dating thing will go better than just selfishly looking for something from the other person.
No,
Yeah.
it's brilliant and so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It's so quick that people jump to what you were describing, which is if this
Mm-hmm.
person doesn't want me, then I'm worthless. It's so easy
Yeah.
to feel. It's so easy to feel that way, but it's so obvious that there is care that needs to happen if those are the thoughts that are coming up and those are the feelings and emotions that are coming up for a person.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was really struck by in True Love. I was struck by the section about telephone meditation. It felt like it
Yeah.
applied to this for me. The idea that, so just for the listeners, telephone meditation is described as an opportunity to basically use like your phone vibrating or ringing as a moment to wake up and breathe instead of just immediately grabbing it, but acknowledge that the reason that you need a calming breath is because of that anticipation that comes up when you get a text or a call. It's like this thing that is this going to be good news or this going to be bad news? Does this person want me or do they not want me? Am I
Yeah.
going to be happily married or am I going to be alone my whole life? And like how many of these big questions come up when that phone rings, and to see the sound. I wrote it down actually. Listen, this wonderful sound brings me back to the present moment. And if it could be possible to use these moments when we might have thoughts like this come up as moments to breathe, calm ourselves, show ourselves the love and compassion that we really feel we need. I think it happens like 100 times a minute sometimes in these dating situations where suddenly your worth can feel like it's completely on the line. The phone's ringing and literally is ringing sometimes, or you're waiting for a very specific text. That was also mentioned in the quote that Diana read as well, right? The feverish waiting for a phone call or an email. It's so literal in this situation,
Mm-hmm.
but it feels like it could definitely apply. The idea that there's just dating is a very disruptive process. It's very disruptive. And I think a lot of the times what I feel and what I'm taking from this conversation and from the reading, which I'm so grateful you encouraged us to do, is is that I need to take more moments to calm myself, tend to myself, and breathe, and
Mm-hmm.
get back into the present moment instead of telling myself some kind of story that all my worth and value lays on what this text message says, which is crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy when you say it out loud.
Mhm.
I like the telephone meditation part of it too, but I didn't connect it to dating. But you're right. Like, because so much of dating is waiting, right? Waiting, anticipating other people's responses to you, whether that's in a big way, right? Like, will they choose me in that most final, ultimate way of like marriage? But just like the little daily choosings of like, will he text me back? Or and is it going to be a happy message that I want to hear, or like one that shoves me away? And that it's such a difficult, like, it's a good question to live with, that state of anticipation of like, am I valued, am I wanted by this person that I met last week, or by the, you know what I mean, like it's too, yeah, our self-worth is way too heavy to put in the hands of that. And anyway, I'm so glad you brought up that telephone meditation thing, because I think every time we feel our phone vibrate, and there's a technological component to it as well, right? That like the way that technology mediates our relationships now, that it kind of makes us think in those terms, right? Of like, what does this vibration mean? Is it going to be a good or bad message about me as a human? I don't know. Yeah.
Mhm. I really appreciated how both of you related that to the telephone meditation, as you were saying. I'd never put it together with dating either, but I think that's exactly right with how it functions these days. And I also really appreciate what you said, Venerable. I think it matches my own experience where there's this view, the ultimate view in many forms of Buddhism is that we are already enlightened at our core, that at our nature, we are boundless love, boundless compassion, boundless wisdom. And the goal of spiritual practice is not to create something new or enter into a new state, but to gradually clear away obstacles to seeing that and inhabiting as fully and presently as we can. And when we fully clear away all obstacles and are fully living this in an embodied way of boundless wisdom and compassion, that's when enlightenment is. It's not like some kind of abstract thing out there. And so I've always found that, again, easier said than done, but if I have that sort of view in mind when I'm approaching dating or relationships with other people, then those pings, like the texts coming into my phone, always seem just a little bit less heavy. Like I can take them a little more lightly if I have that kind of view, or if I can, as you were saying, Mallory, just like take that moment to remind myself, like, oh yeah, that there's actually something deeper going on here, and I don't necessarily have to react just to this one text right now. I also think it helps, like, this might be going kind of far out there, but like in Buddhist cosmology, given that we have like infinite rebirths that we've had under our belt, one life's relationships become less significant or there's less stakes, I feel like. So it's easier to take it a little more lightly that way for me.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is something I know I am always searching for when I talk to people of other faiths. Is I'm a big fan of holy envy, and I'm kind of a spiritual collector in general. I definitely feel like, and now I will adopt this principle that belongs to a different religion, and I'm creating my own little quilt of all the things that I like about being alive. And I appreciate I just feel like one of the things that I without pointing any specific blame anywhere, that I grew up in my tradition feeling like the purpose of life in some ways was to have a family. And hearing the other cosmologies and what other people believe the purpose of life is, and honestly, Mormons don't believe that either, but I think that culturally it feels like a very strong message that the purpose of your life is to organize a family. And if it doesn't happen in this life, it needs to happen in others. And so it creates this, especially for a long-term single person, it creates a very strong desire and a very strong lack. And so there is something comforting about hearing the way others process the point, you know?
Yeah.
I
mean-
so this podcast name is The Soloist. I just want to know, Jesus is the ultimate soloist, right? Did he have a family? He didn't, right? He had parents, but maybe he was the son of of God. But last time, Diana, you shared with us that having a family is like the threshold for your final emancipation or liberation. How does Jesus's life relate to that?
Yeah. That's such a beautiful question. I mean, I think people would probably say that he had a specific mission on earth, and that didn't include marriage. But it's interesting that, like, why do we let him be an exception and then we assume that none of us are? I think you're exactly right. And in fact, there were passages in the New Testament that actually deliberately show Jesus holding family at arm's length to pursue his mission and his calling. So when he's 12 and he goes with Mary and Joseph into town, and they lose him and they can't find him, and then they eventually find him, he's preaching in the temple and talking to people there, and then they're like, what have you been up to? And he's been like, I'm about my father's business, which is a little bit of a dig, because it's like my real father, not you,
My real dad, not you, Joseph.
But that's like clearly him And then, you know, of course, the famous, like, he who is not willing to leave father, mother, brother, sister for me or whatever is not worthy of me. Like, just this idea that Jesus was all about listening to some deeper call that isn't necessarily about the particular relationships you have, and this idea that family attachments could potentially be a distraction from that call. And obviously, I think there's so much to be said about Mormonism just relishing those attachments so much, and trying to say there's something so holy about being beside other human beings, and that's why we want to focus on like family. And it's always tempting to avoid this, but lean in. It's good for us. There's so much growth there, and I think that's so beautiful. But we also do really have examples in our own tradition that we don't want to hold up and lift, where it's like, okay, but sometimes family can get in the way of really listening to what your call is. And you know, the other irony, even just closer to home with our faith, is like, we're a very young religious tradition, not even 200 years old yet. And the first several decades of the church were all people who left their families, in some cases permanently, to join this church and move across, basically leave like what was then the United States and go into the Utah territory. And they all were willing to leave their family attachments to follow something. And so I think what you're bringing up is really profound. And I think the focus on marriage and family is really beautiful in Mormonism. But like we do with so many things, sometimes we want everything to be in a neat, tidy bow. And it seems like the more truthful thing, even if we're looking at our own church, is to be like, sometimes life calls for that, and sometimes life calls for something else. Sometimes it calls for burrowing into relationships, and sometimes it calls for like stepping back. And yeah, being able to hold the fact that both of those are part of good living.
I love the question as well, and have sat with it many times. And I think one of the things that has brought me comfort, and uh, I enjoy the view that Christ in many ways embodied the sort of perfect union of the divine and the divine masculine and the divine feminine in his characteristics, his attributes, and his behavior. And so sometimes I think that this is like, sometimes we refer to it as like a tie over the shoulder moment. Like, I'm going to talk about Mallory and her beliefs versus anything that that I could say is official. But I like to look at marriage as more symbolic often too. The idea that what we're doing is we're talking about union. We're talking about union with God. And if Christ is the perfect, is the perfect depiction of how we can have a union in ourselves, of the opposite sides of humanity, of light and darkness at once, or the idea that perhaps the marriage that we're discussing the most is the one between Christ or God and his people. That's helpful for me. I think that marriage and our ideas around marriage can get to a point where it just feels, it feels very tunnel visiony, and it feels like it's about like Diana was saying, one specific mission, and that just doesn't feel like what this conversation is really about. It feels like it's much more about the idea that we are uniting and we are willing to give ourselves fully to the divine, and not necessarily having that marriage lead to marriage in our lives. I think sometimes it does. I think sometimes uniting with the divine and marrying your more holy calls can lead you down the path of marriage. But I just don't think that I just don't take things as literally as I used to in general. And so I find Christ as a symbol very helpful in that way.
Yeah, definitely. Jonathan, do you have any response to that? You also think we should focus more on Jesus?
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say as an authority on LDS theology. As we were talking, just kind of struck me, there's some parallels on that front in the Buddha's life story too, where the Buddha actually had a wife and a child, and was married and was part of a noble family in his previous life. And then he actually ended up leaving his wife and child as part of his journey towards enlightenment. And so there's a lot of interpretation that goes on around that in our tradition too. But there is that element of like, yeah, sometimes you have to remove yourself from traditional family life in order to reach these deeper levels of love and wisdom. And then the Buddha's wife and child both joined him later in the
Huh.
religious community, actually, as followers of his too. So sort of a reconstituting of the relationship there. And the Buddha also, before he was enlightened, led a life of, he had a court harem at the time. His father and mother gave him all the pleasures he could want, partly in order to have him avoid going off and doing his thing, because they knew he had a spiritual bent. So they were trying to keep him in the palace to be the king later after his father died, because he was the heir. So there was this element of like, renunciation of those sorts of carnal pleasures as well, and then reapproaching them later in a very different way and less attached way. So anyway, there's definitely some resonances there between the two stories.
That's
Agreed. How would you feel if we went through the 4 components of love and just say a little bit about what each of those are as a sort of practical, teaching point?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. So in the book that we read, True Love by Thich Nhat Hanh, he identified 4 principles of love. I don't know where you guys
Venerable,
want to jump in.
Do you want to start us out, Venerable, as our monastic teacher?
So I'll do the first 2, and then you do the second 2, right?
Sounds fair.
All right. So loving kindness and compassion usually goes together. When people say you practice compassion, that also include loving kindness. And in a very simple and easy way to understand loving kindness, which is you bring happiness to people. And then compassion is you help people to transform their suffering. So bring happiness and take away their suffering. So that is an easy way for me to remember and to practice. And they blend into each other. Because when you love someone, when you care for someone, you want to bring them joy, and also you want to help them in some way transform their unhappiness or suffering.
Mm-hmm. I think there's something interesting about that what does that mean? To walk into a room and to want to remove someone's suffering and bring love. I don't know. Yeah, just on a sort of practical level, what does that look like?
So there's so many ways that you can help someone who is suffering, who is unhappy, right? But in this case, when we talk about compassion, I think first of all, we have to understand that suffering is a part of our life as human. It's like mud in a pond, right? So there's mud, and what you bring is you bring the lotus seed. You plant on that mud. You kind of utilize the mud to grow lotus. It doesn't mean that you have to hey, give me your suffering, I'll take them away. It doesn't happen like that. There's certain difficult experiences that this person is undergoing. So it depends on specific kind of suffering that they're experiencing. But just seeing those sufferings as mud, as fertilizer, so that when you see suffering, you see there is potential for lotus, for potential for happiness. Because without suffering, you would never appreciate happiness. Have you ever remember a time when you were so hungry and anything would taste so good? It doesn't have to be, lobster roll or tofu, fried tofu or whatever. When you're hungry, anything is good, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that. Thanks to suffering, we appreciate happiness. So that is how, you skillfully help someone to transform their difficult emotions or suffering.
Mm.
Can I ask a question about bringing happiness? What if the ways that you try to bring happiness or love, what if they're not received? And
Mm.
what if actually you may even cause harm? I think that happens to me sometimes.
So I would first of all, I would ask if I am the one who bring happiness and then they don't want to receive. I would ask first of all, what is my intention here?
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to prove that I'm helpful, or do I
Mm-hmm.
want to prove that I am someone who they can rely on so that they will love me back, or care for me back?
Sure, sure.
Or do I just do that out of my compassion for them? So if is the second case, then it's like you have a really uh, delicious cookie you wanna give me, right? But I don't want to. I'm allergic to cookie.
Mm-hmm.
So would you like force me to eat, or would you just okay? If I share with you, if you don't want, then that's fine, right? So
Mm.
I think that is how I approach people who are suffering.
Yeah.
I bring my compassionate energy to hopefully alleviate their suffering a little bit. But if they don't receive it, maybe they are not ready, or I'm not ready for them. Maybe I'm not the
Mm.
person that they need right now. So I just let them be, or just simply sit with them, be present
Yeah.
with them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to find solutions can make the matter worse. So
Yeah, one of my favorite
Wow.
passages from True Love, another one that I wrote down was the mother does not yet know what is the matter with the baby, but the fact that she has it in her arms already gives her child some relief. That maybe you don't
Mm.
even know what's going on with a person, but to sit with them is maybe the most relief you can give them.
Yeah. I think this again relates to like that really honestly profound comment you made at the beginning, Venerable, where you were like, am I relevant because I'm doing this life and I'm not as in the weeds of a relationship or whatever. So are you relevant to these questions? And something I'm thinking about is how offering somebody a different energy, that is so often what's needed. But I can totally think of moments when someone was trying to give me a loving energy, but I wouldn't have it because I was like, no, no, no. Trust me, I can't be calm. I can't chill out. I can't let go of this. It's not going to be okay. I really need to figure out the details of this or that situation. And I refuse to receive because there's some kind of block in me and something that I'm holding on to where I don't feel like things are going to be okay unless I really do solve this practical problem. But that's not true. What I really do need is like a deep sense of calm and ease. And so I hear that in this question of like how relevant is what a Buddhist monk offers to every situation. It is the most relevant thing. But we're not in a situation to hear that or recognize that all the time because we're so obsessed with our own day-to-day projects and convinced that if they don't work out the way that we want them to, that life is over. So to have somebody like in the flesh witnessing life can go on, you are okay, you are like fun, it forces a question that we sometimes don't even want to, we don't feel brave enough to go there. Yeah.
And I think that's very insightful. And I think it brings out another element of compassion here, which is that in some sense, it arises out of the fact that we're all interconnected within this world of suffering, and that it's not a sense of like, oh, poor that person, like poor you, you're suffering so much, and I'm not. It's like we're all in this together in the mud, and if we can show up for each other in solidarity like that, and like being actually with each other with that energy, as opposed to a more holier than thou pitying energy, that sort of gets more at the essence of it. And so embodying that sense of interconnection, I think, can go a long way, even if we don't know exactly what to do in the moment. Even if we just show up in that energy of interconnection, I think even
Yeah.
if the person doesn't want to receive it, which is fine, then that can go a long way.
I think that is helping me make sense of what was touching about my dad, because my dad is just the epitome of like, I'm not a words guy. I don't know what to say. And like sometimes it's like a little bit like gruff in his spirit, but like you really do feel when he just shows up. And that's what I was saying basically, is like he just sat with me at Denny's over across the French toast. Or like we just sat on the floor and did a puzzle. And yeah, that presence is so powerful, of just like we're existing in time together, in time and space. And yeah.
Time moves differently at a Denny's.
It's true.
Since we are talking about being present, one dating advice I just come up with: if you can sit with someone in silence that for 5 minutes and both of you are fine, then you should date that person.
Ooh.
I feel this way big time. I'm a big believer in companionate silence as well.
Yeah.
Well said.
We'll try it.
I think honestly, I am going to try it. I'm an experimenter these days. I'm like, I'm willing to try anything. And I think it would be kind of disarming to say, would you like to sit in silence for 5 minutes and just see what happens? You know, like, will your head explode or will I run away? You know what I mean?
It can be very telling. Yeah. True.
Jonathan, do you want to explain the other two principles? So we had loving kindness and compassion, and
yes,
people talked about the ways that those go together. What else do we have?
Yes. So we had Maitri in Sanskrit, loving kindness, Karuna, compassion. Then we have Mudita, which is joy, is often translated as sympathetic joy. And this is the sort of boundless joy that takes pleasure in this happiness of others, basically. So any sort of virtuous, loving activity that we see anyone else engaged in, or frames of mind or speech, anything, taking joy in that, again, out of the sense of interconnection that I mentioned. This type of joy can help us overcome these sorts of walls between each other that we set up, that and allows us to enter into deeper communion with each other, to make the love and compassion greater in our relationships. So some of the traditional prayers that we say in my lineage talk about like taking joy in the wisdom and compassionate activities of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, but also like even animals who shelter each other in the cold, or things like from the most lofty, great things happening to the fine-grained details, like small little interactions and frames of mind, taking joy in all of that. So I've found it to be a pretty liberatory way of looking at things, especially in relationships. Like if I'm dating someone or in a relationship with someone, I tend to find myself gravitating towards everything about them that annoys me after I've spent enough time with them. So like, you sound weird when you take a sip of coffee and it's like too slurpy or whatever. And we can easily become fixated on that, patterns of that. But this sort of idea of mudita, of sympathetic joy, shifts the framework to the opposite of that, where we're like really rooting for everyone that we're in relationship with.
Rooting for everyone. That's really nice.
Yeah, definitely. And then the last one here, upeksha, Thich Nhat Hanh refers to it as freedom. It's often translated as equanimity too. And this I've found to be a big one in relationships and dating. It sort of gets at what we were talking about before, where recognition of these boundless qualities of love and compassion and wisdom and deeper practice in them allow us to extend them more and more widely without regard for labels like friend or enemy or stranger. And it allows us to exist in a space where we're not rocked so much by these ups and downs of fortune in our life, where we have like a more rock solid grounding and this natural spaciousness and openness. So we're not as affected by things when they don't go our way, or when things are really great, we don't get carried away by that either.
Mm-hmm.
So this one I think is probably the hardest one to cultivate in my experience, but I think it comes sort of concomitantly with the other three, kind of
Mm-hmm.
naturally rises with them. Um, and I think this equanimity combined with sympathetic joy and love and compassion allows you to see the good in any relationship, to bring out the qualities of growth and moving towards uh, deeper modes of existence as a result of that, even like a temporary relationship or hookup or something, to take good qualities from that into your experience.
Mm.
Or to recognize when a relationship is dysfunctional and harmful, and it's better for you to take a step back from that and recalibrate. It also helps in identifying that, I find.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was going to be my question. All of this love can be almost a little confusing if it feels like you need to walk away from someone. I don't know if you could say a little bit more about that, because even in like the hookup scenario that you were bringing up, I still feel like that can be love, even if it's just for a day or for a couple of hours, or I still feel like what we could be experiencing and giving each other could be genuine love, and not just hookups, but bumping into
Hmm.
people, or one coffee date but it doesn't go anywhere, like that kind of thing. And so I'm
Hmm.
I'm curious. Maybe that's too vague of a question, but I'm curious about the sort of temporary relationships or relationships you need to walk away from, and how you feel these types of love apply.
Yeah, I think, I've certainly been in dysfunctional
Mm-hmm.
relationships in the past. I think there's an element there of what's called idiot compassion in some ways, which is compassion where, rather than being authentic compassion where you're upholding the deep goodness and value of each person, you're kind of just acting as a doormat and mistaking that for compassion. I've certainly been in that role, and I'm sure all of us have at different points. And so I think there's an element of care involved for both parties when you know authentically, like, okay, it's time to step away. There's care involved there if it's done with some discernment. And the other part of your question was around, yeah, in like temporary situations, like temporary relationships too. I think this is another area where I sometimes just have fun thinking about the cosmological implications of it on the Buddhist side, where
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, just for fun, because if we've had infinite past lives, then the tradition says that each of us has been each other's lover or
Yeah,
parent or sibling in past lives. I sometimes like to think of it as a moment of like reconnection and sort of reestablishing that connection and deep relationship in some way from the past, even in ways that we don't realize, like a
that's
subconscious level.
magical. I
Yeah,
So
love that.
beautiful.
yeah,
I love
definitely.
that.
Yeah. And of course, we've also been each other's enemy and like other
Mm-hmm.
dysfunctional things too. So it's all very messy. We're all cut up in this web together, more or less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Venerable,
like
I was just going to ask if you would have anything to add in discussing either temporary or dysfunctional relationships and showing care in those situations.
I think the last part of equanimity or freedom is also sometimes people would say is the ability to let go. And to me it also says something about more about be patient with that than just letting go. Letting go doesn't mean you have to release it immediately, but also be patient with that. And for example, we all in our society we want to be normal, right? Fine all the time. But sometimes not normal is also something we can sit with and be patient with that state of mind. So in certain relationship, I think it's always a chance for me to learn from it. It's not like, oh, my first instinct is that this relationship is dysfunctional, so I should, run away. So if like that, you too, your guard is up, and you may not never find a genuine care from another human being. Maybe sometimes we know when to let go and when to be patient and to just be with that for a while, and that requires our discernment. It's not easy to know, but I think that's one of the quality that our four loving qualities that we can cultivate.
Yeah. I keep wondering if that freedom and equanimity of the last point is kind of what we were getting at with holding things lightly. Like, are you really like believing that you can let go of marital status, for example, or your relationship status, or even a particular relationship working out? Do you really believe that you're going to be okay on the other side of that, and that like the fundamental conditions of reality will continue? You still are a member of the world, a child of God, or is there something so cataclysmic there that you just feel like you're going to jump off not jump off a cliff, but you're going to like fall off a cliff, right? That's what's coming up for me as I'm thinking about this, is just really being able to just trust that reality keeps on being reality, and the questions are the same of like how you're going to show up in space and time among other people, and the scenery will change and the particular people you're with may change, but like just trusting in that. I don't know, that's what's coming up for me, is that holding things lightly thing. Like, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Angels fly because they take themselves lightly, they say.
I also just wanted to like do like back to the temporary relationships thing. The first time that Mallory and I were on our little setup call, I remember us talking about these times when I think we were just like describing going on dates, or like having these like tiny flirtatious interactions and feeling like you have to show up with like a whole universe of expectations to these little things, and that just stepping back, it's like, this is so absurd. Why do I feel like this like guy across the room, like he holds the key to my life? Like, that's such an absurd thing to bring to people. But sometimes it feels like when you're I don't know, when you're conditioned to think that like this is your job, this is what your stage of life is about, is like trying to figure out how to get into this entrance into the real world of marriage, it can make you show up to these things with that kind of thing. And then when, inevitably, as it's been for us, things don't end up that way and you never find the key. And I guess there's like a few different lessons there. One is like, don't show up with that universe of expectations to that person. That like shows a real lack of equanimity and it's like too much. But the other is like, I really do like this capacity for just joy in it, right? Because showing up with that load of expectations also feels like it robs the situation of joy. We have so much emphasis on eternal marriage, and it's such a beautiful, rich concept. And so obviously we're talking about some of the shadow sides of that here, but temporary relationships can also bring such joy, and to just like really sit with like, yeah, that lasted a full month, but what a beautiful gift that I had to be beside this person and to just behold them, like a month is as real as a year, this is the kind of thing too that we say, even though, yeah, we don't necessarily believe in like multiple lives, we definitely believe that God's time is not our time. And there's language in our scripture that will talk about how he has past, present, and future all in front of him at once. And I think there's something like that we should be doing as well, right? And so why, because something doesn't lead to the next stage, why does that diminish its value? And if we can really show up with that kind of joy and ability to like delight in another person's existence. I think it's okay that it doesn't last forever.
Yeah, I think mudita was my favorite. The joy. If I
Mm.
were going to pick a favorite of these four, I don't know if that's heretical, but like, there's just something so beautiful to me about thinking that you could just be rooting for people regardless of what happens. I remember hearing a father in some speech like years and years ago. I don't even remember who the speaker was, but I remember hearing him describe his sons playing catch and how the younger son would always could not catch the ball. Could not catch the ball. But every time the older son would throw the ball to him, he'd be like, that was such a good throw. Was so excited about how good the brother was at throwing and not at all deterred by the fact that he couldn't catch the ball. But it was just so much like, nobody's a loser here. My brother's he has an incredible arm. And I love the idea that it's like, yeah, the relationship doesn't last forever. We don't have any cherished outcomes in this situation, and we're able to just root for each other and say like, I really hope that you like absolutely have the most beautiful life regardless of whether or not I get to be in it. I just want what's best for you. That feels so good to me, and it feels like something we're all so like inherently capable of and forget that we are.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right, and I think that makes going into any sort of relationship, even like a very temporary dating sort of one, a lot richer. Because if you're rooting for each other, if you're growing, if you're taking joy in some way in the interaction with the other person, then that's great, and it doesn't have to be forever necessarily. Yeah, it can be what it is.
I feel like you guys solved it.
You guys cracked it.
Mallory's question about like, can you be a loving person and date? And I'm kind of like, sure, of course you can now, which I didn't feel an hour and a half ago.
Really, it's been such a gift to talk to you both. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Likewise, this was a lot of fun. Yeah, I think we'll have to start a Buddhist podcast on relationship and dating and invite you on as our guests.
I think that would be such an incredible resource. And because I think that romance and dating is one of the most challenging areas of desire and lack that people deal with. And there's just so much loneliness and so many ideas and so many lies and stories around the topic of being on your own. It makes equanimity extremely rough. But there is just nothing like dating from a place of equanimity. I think I've experienced it once or twice on my thousands of dates. But occasionally when I've experienced it, I've got to feel so at ease with like kind of what Diana was describing, just getting to be next to a person that I believe God is completely delighted by, and figuring out how I could be delighted too, and that it doesn't need to be a particular romantic kind of love. That was one of the things I've loved most about this conversation. I've never quite understood what the point of the distinction between romantic love and love is, and why we feel it means so much more to be loved romantically than it is to be loved by everyone who loves you in your life, and to be loved by God and to be loved by self. It's honestly a kind of confusing territory for me.
Yeah, it is for all of us to some degree, I feel like.
I feel like one thing that listeners are going to miss out on is I've loved all these moments in this conversation where somebody says something and then just Venerable and Jonathan are just nodding very appreciatively. I just feel like you guys have such a nice presence and you're such good listeners.
Thank you. That's a high compliment.
Well, thank you both so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me and Jonathan here, and it's been a great conversation. This romantic thing that I have never like delved into today is a highlight of my monastic life, talking about this.
What?
That's lovely. The funny thing is you're an expert. So
you are, yeah. If that's one thing that came from this, is we convinced you that your life is very relevant to what everyone's going through, that's good for us, because it clearly is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Yeah,
thank you so
thank
much
you
for
both.
the beautiful spirits you've cultivated and for sharing them with us today and all your beautiful wisdom.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want to continue the conversation with us, we've got a couple of options for you. You're welcome to email us with any feedback or topic suggestions at hello@thesoloists.org. You can also follow us on Instagram. Our account handle is the.soloists. And if you're not on Instagram, don't let us give you FOMO. Enjoy being unplugged from social media. Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.